Welcome to section 13 of immunodeficiencies. In this section, we'll be discussing Chidiac-Higashi syndrome. Let's get started. This story takes place in a dense jungle. From this location, this factory ships exotic animals out to zoos around the world, and they also ship the food required to feed those animals. Unfortunately, since the factory is located so close to these wild animals, the workers here occasionally need to fear for their lives in the event a hungry predator breaks into the factory. And that's exactly what happened today. As you can see with these wild cheetahs roaming around the factory, they're chasing out these poor workers. Well, these cheetahs should help you remember the name Chidiac-Higashi syndrome. Now look at this forklift wreckage. Now the factory worker operating this forklift was so startled by the cheetahs that he wasn't paying attention to where he was going, and he crashed into that conveyor belt, destroying both the conveyor belt and the forklift. Now notice that the conveyor belt is actually connected to the outside of the factory in the truck loading area. Normally, from the inside of the factory, the conveyor belt will carry items from the factory and through this tube you see here, and then it enters the truck loading area. And that tube refers to microtubules. And this is to remind you that microtubule dysfunction is at the heart of Chidiac-Higashi syndrome. And as noted here, this is a problem with the LIST gene. Let's discuss that more now. What is the LIST gene? So if you look outside the factory now, you can see the truck loading area. And the man in charge of loading the truck has his clipboard and a checklist. Let's zoom in to see this better. The list part of the checklist is spelled incorrectly. It's spelled L-Y-S-T. LIST spelled this way references the LIST gene, which is again defective. And LYST actually means lysosomal trafficking regulator gene. LYS for lysosomal and T for trafficking. So again, this checklist stands for the LIST gene, which is defective in Chidiac-Higashi syndrome. As you can see, this truck loading manager is confused. There's no product coming out of the factory. But we know why there's no product exiting the factory. It's because the conveyor belt is broken. So these two people taking care of truck loading have lots of free time. And this one decided that he would take a quick snack while he's waiting. And he's packed a Reese's peanut butter cup. We like to use Reese's like this to represent autosomal recessive conditions. So this Reese's peanut butter cup here should help you remember that Chidiac-Higashi syndrome is an autosomal recessive condition. Now let's go back to look at that conveyor belt. Normally, factory workers will place materials back here where you see these large boxes, and then they're sent to the loading truck outside. Well, with the damage at the end of the conveyor belt, these boxes start piling up here. And these boxes contain animal feed, so you can see they're super large granules, likely used to feed super large zoo animals. And these large granules of food are round to help you think of the shape of granules. And the fact that they are large is to help reinforce the large granules that build up inside cells of patients with Chidiac-Higashi syndrome. And here's what happens. Because lysosomes cannot be transported appropriately, again, because of the LIST gene defect resulting in microtubule dysfunction, the lysosomes will build up inside the cell, becoming large, just like these large granules are building up inside the factory. And the buildup of these large granules in the cells can cause various problems throughout the body. So let's discuss some of these problems now. First, look at this table the factory workers normally use for lunch and other celebrations. Apparently today, the workers were celebrating someone's birthday, or at least trying to before they were attacked by cheetahs. But you can tell there was some sort of party going on because of all those balloons and festive pies. Well, one of the invading cheetahs has found this pie and started to devour it like a hungry pie-eating predator. Well, this pie represents the pyogenic infections that can occur in patients with Chidiac-Higashi syndrome. And patients are susceptible to pyogenic infections because their phagocytic cells can't appropriately kill invading bacteria. And that makes sense. Phagocytes need to form the phagolysosome in order to destroy invading pathogens. So even if the phagocyte brings in the pathogen, it won't be able to kill it. So again, in Chidiac-Higashi syndrome, lysosomes can't be transported effectively, so bacteria cannot be killed effectively. Therefore, patients will get pyogenic infections. Now this cheetah, having gotten his fill of pies, is now interested in eating some of those large granules. As he departed from the ravaged pie table, he stepped in pie filling, which now paints the floor with each step. The shape of these cheetah footprints resembles the multilobular appearance of the nuclei within neutrophils, and the fact that they are purple should help reinforce the fact that these footprints represent the neutrophils. So the cheetah is now eating those large granules and left those footprints that look like neutrophils. So bringing these ideas together should help you remember that the defective transportation of the lysosomes within the neutrophils leads to large granules within the neutrophils. Since there's such a crazy buildup of large granules of food from this conveyor belt malfunction, some of the large granules are falling from a high height. So as they descend to the ground, they have a lot more momentum. In fact, one of the large granules had enough momentum that it could actually smash one of the watermelons that was placed on the food table. Look at that smashed up watermelon. Well, we like to use melons like this to represent melanocytes. And melanocytes are the cells responsible for providing pigment to our skin. And the big granule that smashed open the melon represents the large melanosomes that build up within melanocytes. And those melanosomes you can just consider large granules as well. Some of the melon contents have exploded onto this nearby cheetah. Let's zoom up to see this better. You can see black seeds and white chunks of melon rind all over the face and eyes of the cheetah. The white rind represents albinism, and the black seeds represent areas with pigment. So these patients have only partial albinism. And the fact that some of the seeds and rind have covered the eye of this cheetah should help you remember that even the eyes may lack pigment. These patients often have fair blue eyes or even red eyes because the vasculature of the back of the eye can be seen. So again, black seeds and white rind represent partial oculocutaneous albinism. Now, one of the granules has also landed on a plate. This plate represents platelets. Together, these ideas should help you remember that granules can be visualized in platelets. And hopefully you've noticed that if granules build up, the cells are less effective. This even applies to platelets. So if platelets aren't functioning properly, then patients can experience mild problems clotting effectively. So when you think of the granule on this plate, think of mildly dysfunctional platelets too. Now let's look at the swan. Swans are one of the types of animals that this factory exports out to zoos. Let's zoom up. One of the large granules has fallen and smashed open the cage holding the swan. Well, the swan represents Schwann cells, and the large granules represent the large granules that can be seen within the Schwann cells. Now free, this swan is hungrily pulling down these sausage links from the party table and devouring it. I guess this swan likes to eat sausage links. Well, these sausage links look like myelinated neurons, and the fact that the sausage links are getting destroyed by the swan should help you think about the neuronal damage that occurs as a result of defective Schwann cells. For example, patients can get progressive neurodegeneration or peripheral neuropathy. Going back to the table where the pies are located, you can see several party balloons. Some are red, some blue, some white. These balloons represent blood cells. The variety of colors represents blood cells of all types. Well, one of the cheetahs, having its fill of pie, has decided to start playing with these balloons and even popping some of them. And you can see several balloon fragments falling to the ground. This balloon destruction should help you remember pancytopenia, which can occur in patients with Chediak-Higashi syndrome. Now we can see another cheetah who's playing on top of this cage. You can see that he's taken several of the balloons that were tied to that green box on the ground and broke the string and batted those balloons into the cage. We like to use cages to represent macrophages because they engulf pathogens and other material, just like things are placed into cages. So cage, macrophage. And these red balloons represent red blood cells. And the fact that these red balloons are entering this cage represents how red blood cells are being eaten by macrophages. This condition is called hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, or HLH. This is a devastating autoimmune condition that may occur in some patients with Chediak-Higashi syndrome. Just like the name indicates, red blood cells are phagocytosed by macrophages. And with that, you've learned all you need to know about Chediak-Higashi syndrome.